you do. So welcome everybody. I'm really excited today, as I always am, to host Charles. And we're going to be talking about mindset today, specifically about Dweck's work on growth and fixed mindset. So I'm really excited about that. But I'm Christina. My company is SwellFit Living, and I help people optimize their mind and body. I'll be actually talking about nutrition next week, which is another favorite subject. And and today we'll be talking about mindset. So Charles, you're in.
Yeah. So I'm Charles Leon, as many of you may know, former designer, now also speaker, now also do all sorts of other things as well. But what we're trying to do, Christina and I, with these talks is to sort of knit them together into basically a mind and body sort of forum. So any suggestions that you may have of things that you want to talk about as well would be great to know. But the idea is to bring two perspectives to similar subjects and to gradually sort of build a wealth of knowledge underneath it. So today we're going to talk about mindset. Now, mindset wasn't really anything that was around too much before Carol Dweck wrote her book in, I think it was first published in 2006. But as with all sort of amazing ideas, once it's out there in the world, suddenly you think, oh, that's so obvious and so simple. And that's how you know, I reckon, that's how you know that it's a really good idea. So what she's done basically is she's distilled how we think and how we approach things into two separate mindsets. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what those mindsets are. They're very simple. One is called growth and the other is called fixed. It's not open, it's not closed, it's nothing else. It's fixed and growth. And this is all based, she was a psychologist and still is a psychologist working, I think, at Columbia. And she's, over the many years with many experiments and many trials, has developed this theory of how we can optimize our learning, our creativity, and our understanding of things. So there's sort of two parts, as with everything. Everything's in contrast, in dilemma, in two parts, basically. One is the internal part, which is how you view yourself. The other is the external, which is how you help view other people. And they're two sort of distinct parts of the two distinct mindsets as well, because a lot of her work was to do with educating children as well, and sports people too. And she's got quite a lot of examples of sports people in her book, which is a multi-million seller as well, which is great. So you might sort of think, well, you know, why does it matter? Who cares? I am what I am, and nothing will change me. And I'm stuck this way. I was born this way. I'm talented. I'm not talented. I'm handsome. I'm not handsome. Who cares? Well, her view, and the view, I think, very much a contemporary view now, particularly in neuroscience, is that we have what are called plastic brains. It's plasticity of the brain, in that we can change and become whatever we want. And we've got a few examples of that we'll come to later, of people who have really made it over and above and beyond where they started or where people perceived them to have started. So this thing about plasticity of the brain, which is a very current topic at the moment, is our ability to repurpose and change how our, particularly our habits and our neural circuits work and combine to produce a result or an outcome. And that's basically, without being a neuroscience, that's where Carol Dweck comes from, in talking about whether we are, it's the same old argument of nurture or nature. And she comes at it from the angle that we also discussed in Deliberate Practice, is that you are not born gifted, and you are not born with a special propensity to be a musician. You're not born a Mozart, you become a Mozart. And one of the central sort of tenets of the whole of her sort of work is about it's all about becoming and not being. And, you know, if you can crystallize where she's going with all of this and how she helps people to transform themselves, it's all about becoming and not being. Now, as always, those are very glib phrases unless they've got some substance behind them. What she also sort of talks about is that that we can all acquire abilities, that it's a question of how you apply your mind, your attitude, and how you apply your effort, your amount of resources to the problem or the thing that you want to deal with. So one of the other sort of key central things, there are 2 or 3 things that I have to sort of keep in balance. One is the definition of success. Now, there aren't very many good definitions of success. The one that I really like is the one from Earl Nightingale, which is that success is defined by someone who is moving towards a defined purpose, and that gives it purpose. So that is his definition of success. And I think that works really, really well. So Dweck says that basically we can learn at any age. It's not limited, and this is true with plasticity of the brain as well as with people who've had severe accidents or have had to repurpose areas of their brain, is that we can learn at any age, and not only can we learn, we must learn at every age because it keeps your brain alive, alert, and working. And this comes down to my 2 sort of tenets, which is attitude and effort. So mindset is your thinking, is basically your attitude to everything. Whereas effort is the amount of resources or resilience or persistence that you apply to solving the problem, whatever that might be.
And so the other thing that we also talked about is that driven towards that specific goal as well.
Absolutely. And we'll come to quite a bit of that because what's really interesting is that it's not sufficient just to be resilient or persistent. You have to be moving steadily towards a goal, which fits in very well with the Earl Nightingale definition of success. Is success or satisfaction or purpose or whatever, or meaning for that matter, is all about moving steadily towards a goal. Not necessarily, and it must be a goal that you want, of course. So there are these 2 main mindsets. The first one is, as I said, is fixed, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail in a second. And the other one is growth. And she's called them fixed and growth because fixed does exactly what it says on the tin, in that it constrains your thinking. It makes you believe that the abilities you have are the abilities you have, and that's it. Those are the cards you're dealt with, and there's nowhere to go from that. So it's all set in stone. Now, 2 big issues that she deals with, which we'll come to again and again and again in this talk, is about failure and how we deal with failure. And if I can sort of just mention, I don't know if any of my children are on tonight, but if they are, they know exactly what I'm talking about. One of the big arguments we always had here at home was when the kids were at school is should they be allowed to fail or should they go for perfection? My wife would always say, no, they've got to do it right. It's got to be perfect. And I would always say, well, let them just have a go and see what they can get out of it and see how far they can go. And then sort of, anyway, I've never won the argument, of course, as you would expect. But as far as Dweck is concerned, failure obviously is one of the key elements to how you can either succeed or fail, and fail not necessarily in the same sense as failure. So, so we'll come to how those are both defined in just a moment. The other part of that is, of course, the amount of effort and the type and the quality of the efforts that you make. So it isn't sufficient just to try hard. You have to be trying hard with some sort of what Christina and I would call deliberate practice. In other words, you must sort of receive feedback, you must learn from mistakes, you must learn from failure, and you must sort of learn to grow.
And so I think one of the things that I just wanted to mention with that, I think basically what I learned a lot from fixed and growth mindset is the ability, and you can kind of tell when people have a fixed or a growth mindset, is how people receive feedback. And how they action the feedback, how willing they are to accept the feedback, and how willing they are to come into a deliberate practice to change the feedback. And this is what we were talking about with deliberate practice and coaches, and especially what you and I do with businesses and individuals is we give them feedback, allow them to change towards the purpose of the goal. And that is obviously
one of the key examples that we'll give is John McEnroe,
yeah,
who is notoriously the bad boy. Let me just see if I can I've got a slide for you. If I can get it up on my screen, 1 second. Yep, I can. Right. So, these are basically just in very simplistic terms, setting out some of the key qualities of either fixed or growth mindset. And we'll talk about fixed first. Now, one of the key things is that a fixed mindset will believe that you're born with a gift, and it believes that that you have talent or you don't have talent. So that means that, of course, if you have talent and you fail, that means that you are a failure. Now, that essentially reflects on your personality, on your character. And I think that's quite often where fixed mindsets hold us back. One thing that I must say as well, of course, is that we don't have just one type of mindset or another type of mindset, that we can be all kinds of mindset. And unfortunately, we can be all kinds of mindset at the same time as well. It's very confusing. But if you have this belief in talent, that you've either got it or you haven't got it, and the same with intelligence as well, that it's either fixed and it tells the whole story, then you're sort of doomed. You've got nowhere to go. I'm just going to take that off for a minute. So you've got nowhere to go, and what it means is that you become very judgmental. And with a fixed mindset, if you have failed or if you have seen somebody fail, then you will feel that you are judged, and you will feel that you are in a state of failure. And the problem with that, of course, is that you will be seeking praise. And this is, I mean, we know this more from children, I think, than we see in adults, although John McEnroe is a pretty good example of someone who went right off the rails. So if you give praise, praise for the result as opposed to the effort, the problem is that everything gets predicated on that attainment. And if you haven't achieved it, or you have achieved it, then you are judged on that basis. Now, if it's judged on effort, as we'll come to when we look at growth mindsets, then you still have the ability to learn from everything that happens. But the problem with this praising and this judgment is that it assumes that people won't change, that they can't grow effectively. So therefore they don't have that sort of growth mindset, and that they're fixed in their abilities. And that means that there's winners and there's losers. Now, one of the things Christina and I were talking about earlier is, I'm sorry to say, but this is a very American mindset of that there are winners and there are losers. And I mean, we've all heard sort of, loser and all of that. But that really sort of seems to set things to say that you've either got it or you haven't got it. And if you haven't got it, then you're a loser and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, what neuroscience, what psychology, particularly people like Carol Dweck have proven is that this is not the case, that people can and do change with the right encouragement, with the right growth mindset. The other,
I was going to say just one thing I thought it was very interesting reading her work about when the children or the kids, or at any age really, were praised and had more of a fixed mindset, they would stop and only do simple tasks from that point because they were afraid of failure. Where the people of the growth mindset, that was the biggest determination. It's like the people of the growth mindset, that first failure they came into came into, they started to figure out how to decipher and solve it. And they actually went for the harder problems instead of where the fixed mindset went with easier, to prove that they were innately talented with that idea. And it's easy for kids and for adults to work out of it. And like you said, I do think it's there are different points, like you were even talking about during the day, we could be in a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So I just wanted to mention that.
Often we are. I mean, often
Yeah.
you are in a situation where, you know, your demons kick in and you think, you know, well, I'm just not talented enough, or yes, I am. And I think the other thing with this is that there's something called the confirmation bias, which is what they call a hardwired cognitive bias. Confirmation bias is something that says that you will only look for evidence that actually justifies your already existing beliefs. So if you believe that you're talented, and therefore you will only look for the right kind of praise that will tell you that you are talented. And I mean, I've certainly seen that in my children, is that they will draw the same thing again and again and again because they got praised the first time. But the better route, I think, is to say, well, let's move on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. So confirmation bias is something that we all have, and it's quite, I mean, seek and you will find is the basic premise of it, because when you're looking for something, that's what you see. So it can sort of, to some extent, handicap us and set us into a fixed mindset. And the other thing is, of course, that this then leads to labeling, to stereotyping. So you think, right, everybody fits into certain categories or certain boxes, and that's how we'll view them. Now, there are other reasons that we do that, but one of the related reasons to this is the fixed mindset. And of course, it suggests that that if your mindset is fixed, that you have a limited amount of intelligence. Well, I hope that's not the case, because if so, I'm completely doomed. So I'm not going to go anywhere then. And that you're smart or you're not smart. And, you know, it's this, it becomes very black and white. You're either in or you're out. And I think this then creates sort of the limitations and the barriers that then stop you thinking in a growth way, because you think, if I have to try hard, well, I'm obviously not talented. So it's very difficult, I think, to undo that kind of mindset. And the negative labels and the stereotypes are something that become very deeply entrenched, partly because they're slightly easier than a growth mindset, which takes a bit more effort, of the right kind of effort. So I'm going to go back to the slide for a second, and I'll bring up now, we'll talk about, just very briefly, we'll talk about the growth mindset. Now, there's loads of fantastic examples of this. The ones that I really, really, really like are Chris Hoy, of course, who, whenever you hear him speak, he is always very optimistic, very positive, very forward-looking in his attitude, and every setback becomes a learning experience. So it's something that he knows he can build on in that sense. So the other one, of course, Michael Phelps, 23 gold medals, I think, which is just astonishing. He always talks about how he was encouraged by, I can't remember the name of his coach, but his coach would not let him settle on just good enough. It always had to go one step further and keep going further, further, further. And that he had to have a self-critical mindset as well, or view, so that he could use that feedback in order to go forward. And that then comes down to, pardon me, I'll just get rid of that, comes down to self-belief. And again, sort of all the categories that I'm going to talk about, the same or similar to the fixed mindset. So if you have this self-belief in your ability to learn, then there's a fair chance that you will go for it and you will start to put in the effort. And this comes around to that cycle that we spoke of in Deliberate Practice from Tony Robbins, which is that if you don't take action, then you don't see any result. And if you don't see any result, you don't get the belief. And if you don't get the belief, you don't see the possibility. And so you go either down the spiral or up the spiral. So if you see the possibility, then you think you'll take the action, then you get the result, then you form the belief. So that goes round and round and round and forms a self-belief. So it's in the way Dweck explains it, is that it becomes extremely important to nurture children into a growth mindset very early on, because that will set them up for learning for the rest of their lives. One of my great beefs about education, and particularly primary education, but secondary education too, is that most schools and colleges teach pupils what to learn rather than how to learn. And I don't understand why they don't teach, or maybe they do now, I don't know, but as far as I can see, they don't. Why they don't teach learning skills. Because if there's one thing you want to do is to learn, rather than just to know a set amount of facts. That sounds like a fixed mindset, as with, and I know why they do it, because it's measurable. You can categorize it, and that makes it much easier to deal with, particularly with governments who want their numbers and their results and their statistics. The other really important thing, again, that Christina and I were talking about earlier, is risk. Is that there is a risk involved in actually sort of failing, and failing often. And there's a great example, a very, very famous experiment. I think it was at St Martin's Art School here in London, where they set the first year students into two separate groups. And they said to one group, right, just produce as many, it was in the pottery class, as many pots as you can in the next 2 weeks. But it has to be about quantity. To the other group, they said, no, produce only one very, very high quality item. And the result eventually was that actually those that produced quantity produced higher quality as well, which is interesting, because once you remove the risk of failure, then suddenly you open up a whole sort of gamut of things that you can attempt and risk and try. And a lot of the effort that needs to go into, particularly the growth mindset, is all about that sort of the risk taking and the ability to use failure as a method of learning and of challenging and of overcoming obstacles. Now that, for me, relates exactly into creative thinking. Creative thinking is all about not doing exactly the same thing and expecting a different result, because it ain't going to happen. What's going to happen is you have to think differently, and then you will come up with another solution, no matter how stupid the solution may be. And that's part of the growth mindset, which is why I think it to some extent is something children have, because they play, they try, they test, they do find out where the boundaries are of things. And they do that as a method of learning, but it's fun as well. And we seem to get educated out of that.
Could you say even, and this is, I don't know if it's on or off topic, but with emotional intelligence and curiosity, that would be a lot in the growth mindset, and also what you were just talking about with creative thinking.
I think so. I think yes. I think, well, curiosity is sort of one of the key elements of any creative thinking of any kind. Actually, I don't even want to say creative thinking. I think of natural thinking, because I don't think it is necessarily creative thinking. Creative thinking suggests that it has some sort of purpose, and it doesn't necessarily. And I think we do get educated out of it, and we do get educated into fixed mindsets. But I think that sort of natural thinking becomes creative when it becomes applied to a problem, or to a new solution, or to something of beauty, or something of value. I mean, I think all creativity, if we're talking about creativity, which we are now, is all about value. Somebody has to see some value in something that you create, no matter what it is. That's, I think, nearly, not the whole, but that's a part of the definition of creativity. And I think, and I was listening to Grayson Perry here, who's a wonderful artist, and he's doing a whole sort of series on TV where he's creating a piece of art and is talking to people on Zoom like this about them creating pieces of art. And he basically says that it's all about, he has made his life a learning experience. That's exactly what it is. And his definition of art, which I thought was spot on, he said, art is just a way of dealing with your life. But we sort of forget how to do that because we get so locked into making money, into not making money, into getting a job and doing this and doing that. So the thing is that this comes back to sort of, if you like, design thinking, which is a growth mindset, which overcomes limitations and barriers. That's what it's all about, and overcomes failure, and doesn't necessarily overcome failure, uses failure and uses it in a positive aspect. Because I think also
almost like feedback.
Yes,
using those failures towards your common goal is feedback.
The other thing that gets knitted into all of this, of course, is optimism. Is that it's, or I don't think, if you didn't believe that you could have a positive outcome, then to be honest, you wouldn't actually bother to do anything. Why bother if it's not going to come out good? Which again goes back to the fixed mindset, which says, well, I'm already talented. Why? There's a very famous story actually in the book, I think, in one of the books, about a violinist, a young protege violinist who felt that she was so talented that, in fact, I think she went to Juilliard in New York. She was so talented that she said, well, I don't need to practice as much as everybody else because I'm really talented. And it turned out that all her fellow students overtook her in terms of their competence because of their ability to practice and to learn and to get feedback and to take constructive criticism, which is where sort of guidance comes in. So I don't know if I've sort of mixed things up too much. There's another little diagram which I'm just going to sort of show you, which is a sort of a little diagram of, oh, sorry, done the wrong thing. Oh no, sorry. I'm not so great at this. Photos, not screen. Right, which is this one. Right, so this sort of sets out basically the very basics of the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So basically, a fixed mindset leads to a desire to look smart and therefore a tendency to, and then we look at both sides. So if there's a challenge, someone with a fixed mindset will probably want to avoid the challenge because it will either mean that they're proven talented or not talented, or right or wrong. So there's a risk of failure. And again, failure will come up again and again and again. But whereas a growth mindset will embrace the challenge, will see it as a stepping stone to the next sort of thing. And that sort of encompasses obstacles as well, is that and McEnroe is such a fantastic example of obstacles. He always blamed everything else but himself for any failure that he had, because he couldn't deal with failure at all. It was either the line judge, or it was the food, or it was his health or something, but it wasn't him as such. Whereas a growth mindset will take that and will be persistent in the face of setbacks. Basically, we'll pursue and we'll continue and we'll do it step by step. Then we come to effort. I'm going to talk a little bit later, a bit more about effort and what it is. You see, if I was super talented, then why do I need to bother to even try to do anything? Because I'm already talented. I don't need to. There's no necessity to. Whereas the growth mindset will see that as a route to mastery, or a route to sort of gradually. I don't want to say perfection, because perfection is completely and utterly the wrong word, and is in the fixed mindset camp. So we don't want that. Criticism. You were talking about feedback just a moment ago, Christina.
Yeah,
and,
I think I think that's the main thing that I feel like is the difference between identifying what, if you're in fixed or growth, and then also how people talk in regards to feedback and knowing their in which
being able to accept feedback and to use the feedback or the criticism or whatever. Now, again, you know, I know from personal bitter experience that feedback can be horrible, especially if my wife gives it to me, because I can't accept it, because it becomes very emotional, of course. But the thinking behind a growth mindset is that you take on board that feedback, you take on board that criticism, and you use it to sort of slingshot yourself a little bit further forward each time, a little bit more towards your purpose or your goal, whatever that might be. There's another interesting, I spoke at the beginning about sort of the internal and the external views. And on the external views, it would be how does a fixed mindset view the success of others, and how does a growth mindset view the success of others? Now, a fixed mindset, and hopefully now you're getting a sort of picture of it, a fixed mindset will see the success of others as a threat. You know, they're coming up to my level and that's not right. They don't deserve it. It's not right. They didn't come from the right background. They didn't sort of suffer like I suffered, or whatever it might be. Whereas a growth mindset will find that as a mentor, as an inspiration, as the success of others will give you lessons from which to learn. So there are definitely sort of massive differences between the two mindsets. And I think we've all, as I said, I think we've all got both mindsets, and at varying different times and different circumstances. And we don't always get them when we want them either, but we'll come to how to deal with that in a moment. So I think the result is that, of course, a fixed mindset will remain exactly what it says on the tin. You will remain fixed. That's where you are. You're not going anywhere. You've got your talent. You've got your gift. You've got the cards you're dealt. End of story. Whereas a growth mindset will sort of look at itself and say, actually, I can keep stepping forward and keep learning and keep sort of driving my way towards some sort of goal if I keep pursuing the right sort of goals. And the method to those goals is so remarkably similar to the discussion we were having about deliberate practice and applying those sort of rules for deliberate practice in terms of sort of one small step at a time, and receiving feedback, getting a mentor, getting somehow so that you can actually refine what you're doing constantly. I want to talk about sports now.
Yeah.
Can we?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a couple of examples, I think, about natural talent and unnatural talent. So one of the ones that really sort of leaps out at me is Muhammad Ali, who, from everything I've read and everything I've seen, most people before his big fight with, I think it was with Sonny Liston, before that fight, everybody wrote him off and said, he hasn't got the physique of a boxer, he doesn't move like a boxer, he's never going to do it. And yet, what Muhammad Ali had was the mental game. He won the mental game. And I mean, he's famous for it, of course. I mean, he made up his little poems, he intimidated his opponent, he completely sort of beat them down just by the power of his mental attitude, which I think is phenomenal. Now, it wasn't just that. It's also the fact that he was, as several others that we'll mention in a moment, but he was an incredibly hard worker and really did apply. In fact, there's that famous silly story about him doing crunches. He's doing sort of sit-ups and crunches. And I think the reporter said to him, well, how many crunches do you do? And he says, oh no, I can't remember exactly what the story is, but he says, how many crunches do you do? And he says, well, I don't even start counting until it hurts. So for him, it was all about going a bit further, just a bit further all the time.
I thought it was interesting about his story is that, you know, and whether he believed it or not, obviously he knew that effort was more growth, but he took the approach and he studied all of the people he fought. He studied them in interviews. He studied how they thought. He studied all these other aspects, not only the physical aspects of training for boxing, but I thought that was amazing. He kind of did everything in the growth.
Is that he by that sort of analysis and observation, is that he worked out what his opponent's weaknesses were, where the trigger points were. They could just tweak that little point, and that they would get so mad that they wouldn't be able to focus and concentrate on their game or their match. So for him, it was all about the discipline, about the mental game, and about the process as well. And the process was always moving towards a goal. It was never quite getting to the goal, because I suppose it's diminishing returns, but constant improvement. Now, the other one I want to mention, I don't know how famous he is in the USA, but Ronaldo, who is a phenomenal footballer, and Beckham for that matter. There's a brilliant YouTube documentary about Ronaldo, a scientific investigation of what makes him so good. And it basically all boils down to he works harder than everybody else. That's what it is, and always has done. He came from a very poor background, and worked, and still works, because he says, to be the best, you have to keep doing it. So for him, the growth mindset is always about just doing it a little bit better, a tiny bit better, to improve this, to just tweak that, to just sort of constantly sort of move forward in that sense. And David Beckham was the same, I think, in terms of what he could achieve. The other one I think that probably in America, certainly you're more familiar with, is Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
So Michael Jordan, of course, was rejected, was left out. He didn't make the NBA, is that right? First time?
It was either his high school or college. He didn't make a lot of teams. I didn't even know this before reading about this.
Yeah, but he apparently sort of, everyone thought, no, this guy's never going to make it. Yeah. But he just, and it was one particular incident where he was dropped from the team, where he decided, well, no, I'm just going to work harder than everybody else, which is exactly what he did. And it wasn't so much that his, which amazes me, it wasn't so much that his ratio of what are they called, dunks or not dunks or baskets or whatever it is to non-baskets was higher. They were actually lower than some people, but he did it more. That was the difference. And he worked at it more. And of course, the other one that we spoke about as well was Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
And Ruth, who physically and, well, for all sorts of different reasons, wasn't considered to be a really good baseball player. He didn't look right. He didn't behave right. But again, he got the mental game right and upped his game and was very analytical about his game. Because as far as I understand, he was a pitcher originally.
Yeah.
And that meant that he had the ability to understand better what goes through a pitcher's mind, and therefore and also he wasn't afraid, apparently. So, and some of these things become mythologies, but he wasn't afraid to really swing at it and go for it, because what's the worst that can happen? Nobody thinks a pitcher's going to sort of hit a home run, but he did. Lots and lots and lots of them. So anyway, right. So there are, of course, as with all of these sorts of things, there's a lot of misconceptions about mindset. And I'm going to run through a couple of those, because some of them will sound sort of right until you actually look at what they are and what they say. So misconception number one is many people take what they like about themselves and call it a growth mindset. So we think, yeah, I'm a nice, likable person, and I've got a positive attitude, therefore I'm in a growth mindset. It's not quite like that, because growth is not open. It's not. The meanings are quite different. Open mindset may be that you're open to suggestion, to all sorts of things, may be very good for creativity as well, but not necessarily a growth mindset. And what's important in this, and why this is sort of a misunderstanding, is that it's not just about being open and flexible. It's really about the learning process, and it's the two words, it's the learning and the process. So it's both of those things. So it isn't just about having a nice attitude and being sort of kind, generous, loving, whatever you want. It's not that. It is about the learning process. And that's, we'll come to it again in a moment, but it's not about effort alone. Although it is about effort, it's not about effort alone. Effort is a subcategory of something that moves towards a goal. So it does involve hard work and cultivating ability. And cultivating ability is really where it's at. Is that belief, you have to believe that you can achieve it. You have to have the persistence and the determination to want to do it and to constantly move forward and to change. And you have to be moving towards some sort of target. Now, that doesn't have to be perfection, but it has to be some sort of target. And the other thing that we've spoken about with deliberate practice, with flow, with all these things, is that the minute you start to have purpose, direction, then you begin to find better meaning because you have purpose. So those things all start going together. So misunderstanding number 2, a growth mindset is only about effort. Now, I began to speak about that, especially praising effort. Now, and this is, I think, the cardinal sin that, well, no, I shouldn't call it cardinal sin. It's not fair, is it? But it's praising effort is something that parents do a lot, and rightly so. The reason that they do it is because they've probably heard somewhere from something that that there is this mindset thing that, you know, just don't encourage your child not to feel lost because he's failed or didn't make it or didn't win the race or whatever. But what that means is that that becomes a condition, an excuse, rather than sort of applying the right kind of mindset. So it's about the process of learning and progressing and learning. And so what I think it means is that learning doesn't come magically from innate ability. So you have to sort of keep moving forward with it. And what's important, as with creative thinking, is that you have to, when something doesn't work, you have to find a new strategy. And you know, you have to find a different way to do things. So the application of creative thinking with a growth mindset, I think, is a real killer attribute if you can get it. So it's not, you shouldn't really try harder because you'll just get burnt out if you have got an ineffective strategy. There's no point in sort of running at a brick wall trying to get through it, because you're never going to get through it, no matter how many times you run at it. Well, maybe eventually, but that'd be stupid when you can just run around it. So you might as well do that. So it is really about a creative thinking approach, and it is about asking for help. It can be very collaborative as well.
Does that come back to that practice doesn't make perfect? Practice makes
permanent.
Yeah. So doing a lot of effort, not towards a common goal or just not using the right technique, but that's great that you tried, isn't really the same thing as a growth mindset, because you're not taking deliberate practice or feedback, going towards your goal, small steps, making momentum towards an achievement.
I
think
we should ban the word perfect from all vocabulary. It's just such a terrible word. You've set yourself up to fail if you say it's perfect. Well, no, it isn't. And even if it was perfect 10 minutes ago, it's not perfect 10 minutes further forward. And that, I mean, that really is the metaphor, if you like, for any innovation. All innovation changes. And why does it change? You know, you'd think if we developed a car, well, we have got it right by now. We've been practicing for 100 years. Surely we've got it right. But no, we keep tinkering, we keep improving, we keep innovating, we keep changing. And that is really about sort of having the right kind of mindset, the growth mindset.
Yeah.
So, and it is focusing on some sort of slightly misty goal in front of you, but it isn't about getting there. Because if it was about getting there, we would have got there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many millennia to practice, surely now, we should stop and we should say, right, we've got it all right, but we haven't. And not only, I mean, this is all related to restless minds and to novelty, and we're hardwired, unfortunately, to constantly see novelty, surprise, and to sort of to keep ourselves awake almost, because not everything can become automatic. So I think also that, just back to sort of praising effort, is that if you just praise effort where the process isn't working, then all that can do is lead to frustration, because you're praising somebody, and let's say it's a child and they're trying to do something and you're saying, oh, you're wonderful, it's marvelous, you're doing great, and they're not, and they're using the wrong strategy to do it, then that child at some point is going to be brighter than you are. Is going to say, look, I'm not getting there and I'm doing this all wrong, so maybe I'm a failure. So it can lead to terrible frustration and the negative sort of aspects of it. And the other thing is that effort is not the consolation prize. It's not like, you know, everybody's a winner, because not everybody is a winner. And you won't improve if you think, well, you know, don't worry, it's okay, you made a lot of effort, so it's all right. It's not really. And if you find out it's not working, then you need to sort of find some method to move forward. And that may be taking a guide, a coach, whatever it may be, or a parent or a friend or whatever. So that's why I think with all of this is that process must be tied to outcome. Because if it isn't, then it tends to be a bit rudderless and it goes anywhere. Or it just leads to frustration because you can't get to the perfect outcome. Misconception number 3, ready? So growth mindset equals telling kids that they can do anything, right? So this drives me potty. I mean, and I understand parents say it, and they're right to say, of course they are, you know, we've got to be generous here. But when you tell your kids, yes, you can do anything, you're sort of robbing them of the possibility that they need to work at something, they need to gain the skills to do something. And it also means that if you say you can do anything and they don't achieve what they think they want to achieve, then they may consider themselves a failure or without talent. And I think that's more serious than sort of trying to blanket them from the real world, which is that you have to sort of move forward. It's not just, I mean, that goes for sportsmen, I think, as well, and for, in fact, for business and for sportsmen, for everybody, is that if you say, oh, that's marvelous and you're wonderful and you can do anything you want in the world, but, you know, not everybody becomes a billionaire. And if you think that that's the only outcome that you can have and you don't get there, and you have no roots to sort of continually work towards that, and you don't gain any skills or find any resources along the way, then of course, inevitably, you're going to be frustrated because you cannot possibly get to that point, unless you're very focused, of course, and then maybe you will. But, and I don't want to talk about your president over there, but nevertheless. So otherwise, I mean, that just becomes empty reassurance, doesn't it? And what you have to do, I think, for a growth mindset is focus on the process. And it must be a progressive process as well. So the other thing is about the environment and creating, and this is within the you can do anything, is that it's more important to create an environment in which there is no judgment, and that you're not stereotyped, you're not pigeonholed, you're not sort of boxed in. So that allows people then to believe in their potential. And a lot of this is about belief in potential. Once you believe that you can potentially achieve something, then if you're given the right tools, you can begin to strive towards achieving it. So, so it's all sort of more about sort of collaboration and nurturing. And the final thing is, which Carol Dweck points out, is don't lower standards. There's really no point in lowering the standards, because all that does is say that that you can't achieve where you want to go or these standards. It's more important to push harder towards the resilience and the persistence that's required for a growth mindset. So that's misconceptions. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think just to touch on that last subject, I know we're going a little over time, but that leads directly to not lowering the standards, but keeping moving forward. That relates to flow, deliberate practice, peak performance, all of that. So it's just those little incremental wins towards a vision or a goal that relates to this growth mindset. And I feel like that's been kind of the link that all of these have going together.
Well, I think that brings us to the sort of the nearly last part of this, which is just very briefly. Fortunately, she doesn't just say, here it is, here's growth and fixed mindset, now go off and do it. She does give you some method, because, and obviously it would be much better if you could work with her personally, but she gives a sort of series of short steps. And I think that there's one or two of the steps in the middle of this that I think are just brilliant. The first is, of course, identify a fixed mindset. You've got to identify it first before you can do anything about it. And you usually find it when you're working on a specific problem, but it is difficult to do. I always think of Einstein, who said if I had, I can't remember, there's 100 minutes or 100 hours or 100 days to solve a problem, then I would spend 95 of those just defining what the problem is, and then spend 5 trying to find the solution. So what Dweck suggests is that, first of all, identify your mindset. See what it is, see where it is, and identify it, and embrace it. Don't just let it go. Don't just say, oh, I've seen it, that's it, right, now on to the next. No, embrace it, get onto it, and identify the triggers that actually cause that mindset. Listen to your internal dialogue. And you need, for that to happen, you need to get your language right. And this is actually, I think, a slightly bigger thing than people think, and this is all to do with neuro-linguistic planning, is that if you change your language, you will begin to change your view of the world and how you deal with the world, which is basically mindset. And I think it's incredibly important. If you cut out, for instance, positive words, the chances are, and they're pretty good chances and they're pretty well proven, is that you will begin to change your attitude to things. And they've used this as not a cure, but certainly a treatment for depression as well, is that if you change the language, you begin to change the mindset. But the best thing, I think, that she suggests is that once you've identified your fixed mindset, is give it a persona, give it a name, identify it really specifically. So that might be, well, here comes George rearing his head up in the middle of this sort of problem solving. And I think that's brilliant, because that actually then objectifies it, which means that you can actually deal with it. You deal with it as a personality that needs to change. Don't become schizophrenic, please, but that's the way it goes. And once you've found this fixed mindset, you've given it a name, you've given it a persona, you've given it a character, then you need to educate it and you need to deal with it. So it's actually sort of threading apart all the parts, the bits, and then sort of saying, right, I can deal with that part, and that part, and I can re-educate all of those different tranches in order to be able to deal with them better, so that they give me a more positive result. Because at the end of the day, this is all about a positive mental attitude, basically. And that's what a growth mindset is, except that it sets you up for the whole of your life. Then be conscious of fixed thinking and growth thinking. So not only do you identify your fixed mindset, you need to identify your growth mindset too. And again, I think that's also a thing about language, is if you use the right language to yourself, if you use the right positive terms, you'll find it much easier to actually sort of deal with and overcome and find different strategies, solutions, to problems. And the other thing is specifically apply a growth mindset to a specific problem. And it's not just a vague thing. You can't just sort of have a very nice, beautiful mindset. That goes right back to the beginning, is that it's not just about being a nice, lovely person. It is about sort of getting into the state of mind where you're constantly learning. So that's nearly it. It's just a few sort of quick bullet points is that, which are just extracted to some extent, is that we overcome our fears mostly by identifying them. You won't overcome any fears if you don't actually sort of identify it, isolate it, and deal with it. And praise effort that goes towards a goal, not the achievement. So it's not the goal, it's the process that counts. And bear in mind also, if you, particularly if you've got children, is that too much effort can be a real problem and can lead people to completely burn out and deal with and get into very frustrated states of mind. So it's continuous improvement, as with direct practice. And the little phrase I like is that we often stop taking our medicine once we feel better. Well, don't. Keep taking the medicine, keep taking the pills, and keep dealing with it all the time. And make a fixed mindset a habit that you actually want to change. So hopefully I've sort of covered most of it. The book itself is wonderful. I mean, it really is a groundbreaking book. And it sold millions and millions and millions of copies. And the thing is that what I'm sure is so good about it is that it's so simple. It's so straightforward. It's very simple to state. It's very difficult to implement, but it is worth it, I think. So that's where we're at. So next week, I'm really looking forward to next week because we have a very interesting one, on a slightly different tack. Do you want to explain, Christina?
Yeah, well, the idea, like Charles was talking about at the beginning of just our collaboration in general, it's like having this mind-body approach. And we've been talking a lot about how the mind and how we can change not only our mindset, but our flow and our performance and our practice and our habits. Now we're going to kind of get into more of the physical side of things. And I'll talk a lot about nutrition, specifically, possibly, what anti-inflammatory means, how that could be beneficial, brain foods, how foods can affect how you function, how you can function better, and how to optimize your nutrition on a daily basis to actually help your overall well-being and your mind and your creativity. So I'm excited about that.
Just as a little sort of warning, it does include the use of chocolate.
Yes. We both agreed that was we're both very excited that is included.
Very exciting and very important.
Yes, very important. Very important. Well,
anyway.
Great. So thank you so much. Oh, Charles, do you want to mention about the time?
Oh, yeah. So if it suits everybody better, we'll do it at 6 p.m. UK time, which is 6 p.m. 11 a.m. Mountain Time, whatever that is.
So we'll be doing it, So we'll be doing it a little bit more towards, a little nicer afternoon, early evening time for you guys.
Well, not me anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're going to just see how that works. And and we'll be posting that in the next couple days. So thank you.
I'll post out a replay for those people who didn't quite make it today, or if you want to check out something or make sure that I got my facts right. See you all.